You've got exactly 3 hours to figure out who you really locked up." The officer laughed as the heavy steel door clicked shut, the sound echoing through the quiet holding area with the confidence of someone who had never imagined consequences could travel faster than arrogance. Officer Travis Cole tossed a ring of keys onto the booking desk and glanced through the narrow window of the holding cell where the quiet black man sat on a cold metal bench without saying a word. The man wore a dark gray hoodie, worn jeans, and scuffed work boots that looked ordinary enough to disappear into any crowd in downtown Richmond, Virginia. There was nothing about him that suggested authority, nothing that demanded attention, and perhaps that was exactly why everyone in the station underestimated him. Around the booking desk, paperwork continued to pile up, radios crackled with routine dispatches, and officers walked past without giving the prisoner more than a passing glance. To them, this was another routine arrest on another ordinary Tuesday. They believed they had everything under control. The man simply folded his hands together and calmly watched the second hand of the large wall clock move from one mark to the next. His breathing never changed. His posture never shifted. Even after Officer Dylan Brooks pushed a clipboard across the counter and sarcastically asked if he wanted to admit what he had supposedly been doing near the abandoned warehouse, the prisoner only looked at him with steady eyes before quietly replying, "I'd like to make one phone call." Brooks smirked and leaned back in his chair. Not happening anytime soon. A few nearby officers chuckled before returning to their conversations about football scores and weekend plans, convinced the matter had already been settled. Outside, gray clouds drifted slowly across the Virginia sky while afternoon sunlight reflected against the station's front windows in soft golden streaks. A delivery driver rolled a cart through the lobby. An elderly couple stopped to ask about filing a lost property report, and life continued with the ordinary rhythm of a city that had no idea history was quietly unfolding inside one small holding room. The prisoner lowered his eyes toward the concrete floor for only a moment before looking back at the clock. 3 hours. That number remained perfectly clear in his mind, not because someone had threatened him with it, but because he understood exactly how long it would take before silence turned into questions, questions turned into phone calls, and phone calls turned into a chain of events that nobody inside this station was prepared to explain. His name was Marcus Ellison, although nobody here had bothered to ask twice after running a quick identification check that somehow produced more confusion than answers. One database returned limited information. Another displayed restricted access. A third simply refused to load. Officer Cole dismissed the computer glitches with a wave of his hand. "Government systems are always broken," he muttered before signing another page. No one considered the possibility that the missing information existed because they were never supposed to see it in the first place. Marcus remained silent. Years of experience had taught him something that could never be learned in an academy classroom. Panic gave careless people confidence. Patience exposed them. He listened to every careless joke, every rushed assumption, every shortcut taken because someone believed appearances were enough to establish the truth. Across the room, the wall clock continued its steady rhythm. Tick, tick, tick. Each passing second carried the station one step closer to a moment none of them could reverse. And Marcus knew that when the truth finally walked through the front doors, it would not arrive with raised voices or dramatic speeches. It would arrive carrying nothing more powerful than facts, procedure, and accountability. Before we continue, if you enjoy powerful stories that reveal the strength of the human spirit and the choices that shape our lives, subscribe to Narralight. Every story has a lesson, every choice has a consequence, and sometimes the smallest moment changes everything. Now, let's see what happens next. The minute hand advanced with quiet determination, almost indifferent to the tension building inside the station. Marcus Ellison lifted his eyes from the clock only when another officer unlocked the holding room long enough to slide a paper cup of water across the bench. The younger officer hesitated for a brief second before speaking. "You have been awfully calm." Marcus offered a polite smile. Getting angry has never improved the truth. The officer frowned as though he wanted to ask another question, but footsteps echoed down the hallway before he could continue. Officer Travis Cole appeared carrying a thin case folder under one arm, wearing the satisfied expression of someone convinced he had already solved the story. He dropped the folder onto the booking desk with unnecessary confidence. "Nothing checks out," He announced loudly enough for everyone nearby to hear. No local address. Restricted employment history. Strange identification. That is usually what happens when somebody is pretending to be something they are not. Sergeant Nathan Briggs looked over the paperwork without much interest. Keep him here until we sort it out. Marcus listened without interrupting. Every assumption they made revealed more about their judgment than about him. Years earlier, an instructor at the Federal Law Enforcement Training Center had told every trainee the same lesson on the first day. Never mistake confidence for accuracy. Marcus had remembered those words through every assignment that followed. Whether he was working financial crimes, organized fraud, or undercover operations that required months of disappearing into ordinary neighborhoods where nobody knew his real profession. Today was supposed to be another quiet step in a long investigation involving public corruption and stolen federal evidence. Instead, an unexpected traffic stop had collided with incomplete information and several rushed decisions. The investigation itself remained protected by federal authority, which explained why several databases refused to reveal his assignment. Those security barriers existed to protect lives, not to create confusion, yet confusion was exactly what now surrounded the station. Emily Carter, the owner of the neighborhood hardware store across the street, stepped into the lobby carrying a small paper bag. She had witnessed part of the arrest from her front window and had spent the last hour wondering whether something felt wrong. Marcus had stopped inside her store almost every Tuesday morning for fresh coffee before continuing to work nearby. He always greeted everyone by name, returned shopping carts without being asked, and once helped an elderly customer replace a flat tire during a rainstorm without accepting a single dollar. Emily approached the front counter carefully. "Excuse me," she said. "The gentleman you brought in earlier left his wallet at my store." Officer Brooks accepted the wallet without opening it. "We already inventoried his property." Emily nodded politely, but did not leave. "He has always been respectful. I just wanted to make sure everything is all right." Cole answered before anyone else could speak. "Ma'am, we know what we are doing." She looked through the narrow window toward Marcus, who simply gave her a reassuring nod, as if he were comforting her instead of himself. That quiet gesture unsettled her more than any argument could have. She thanked the officers and slowly walked back outside, but she paused near the front steps and glanced at the American flag moving gently above the station entrance. Something about the silence inside the building felt heavier than it should have. Back in the holding room, Marcus leaned against the cool concrete wall and watched another minute disappear from the clock. 1 hour had already passed. Somewhere beyond the city limits, people who understood exactly where he was supposed to be were beginning to notice that he had not checked in. Marcus closed his eyes for only a brief moment, not out of fear, but out of patience. He understood that truth often arrived quietly, and when it finally did, no hurried explanation would be able to outrun it. Another 30 minutes slipped away, and the atmosphere inside the station slowly changed without anyone fully realizing why. The casual conversations grew shorter. Computer screens displayed the same restricted access notices over and over again, refusing to reveal the missing pieces that Officer Travis Cole insisted did not matter. He crossed his arms and stared at the monitor with growing frustration before tapping the desk with a pen. "Every system in this country breaks when you need it," he muttered. Sergeant Nathan Briggs barely looked up from another report, then finished the paperwork and moved on. Cole nodded, determined to prove he had made the right decision. Confidence had become more important to him than curiosity. Inside the holding room, Marcus Ellison remained seated exactly where he had been since arriving. The paper cup of water rested untouched beside him, while afternoon sunlight stretched across the concrete floor, creating long golden rectangles that slowly shifted with the movement of the sun. He could hear phones ringing somewhere beyond the hallway, printers feeding fresh pages into plastic trays, and officers greeting people entering through the front lobby. Everything sounded ordinary, yet he knew ordinary moments often carried extraordinary consequences. He quietly remembered another investigation years earlier when a senior mentor had given him advice that never left his mind. The truth does not need emotion to survive. It only needs time. Marcus had built his career around those words. Every undercover assignment required patience. Every interview demanded restraint. Every decision had to protect facts instead of pride. That discipline was now protecting him more effectively than any argument ever could. Across the street, Emily Carter unlocked the front door of her hardware store after returning from the station. She placed a fresh pot of coffee behind the counter, but her attention kept drifting toward the police building visible through the front window. Something about Marcus never matched the picture Officer Cole had tried to describe. She remembered the winter morning when an elderly veteran had struggled to carry several heavy bags of supplies through the parking lot. Without introducing himself or waiting to be asked, Marcus had quietly loaded everything into the man's truck before disappearing without accepting thanks. Another customer had once forgotten a wallet containing several $100s. Marcus had found it outside the entrance and returned every dollar untouched. Those were not dramatic acts. They were quiet choices that revealed character. Emily picked up her telephone and hesitated before dialing a non-emergency number. She did not accuse anyone of wrongdoing. She simply explained that the man she knew seemed unlike the person described in the arrest report. The dispatcher thanked her politely and noted the information before ending the call. Inside the station, that message reached no one immediately because everyone remained occupied with routine calls arriving from across the county. Marcus glanced toward the hallway as another officer passed by carrying several evidence boxes. Their eyes met for only a second before the officer looked away. Doubt had begun appearing in small moments like that. Not open disagreement, not confrontation, just quiet uncertainty growing beneath the surface. Officer Dylan Brooks finally stopped outside the holding room and folded his arms. "Can I ask you something?" Marcus looked up calmly. "Of course." Brooks hesitated before speaking. "If you really believe somebody is coming, why do you seem so certain?" Marcus answered with the same steady voice he had maintained since entering the station. "Because truth is not measured by how many people believe it. It is measured by whether it remains true when every assumption falls apart." Brooks said nothing. Those words lingered longer than he expected. As he walked back toward the booking desk, he noticed the large wall clock again. Nearly 2 hours had passed. Far beyond Richmond, inside a secure federal office where silence usually meant concentration, one unanswered check and notification had already become two. And a supervisor who knew Marcus Ellison better than almost anyone else had just pushed away her chair and reached for the telephone with an expression that suggested the quiet countdown was about to end. The second hand swept past another mark on the wall clock, and the room felt noticeably quieter than it had an hour earlier. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence that settles over a place where small doubts begin gathering faster than confident answers. Officer Travis Cole stared at the incident report for the 4th time, reading the same lines without discovering anything new. Every routine verification he expected to confirm his decision had instead produced another missing record, another restricted file, or another unexplained response that refused to fit inside the simple story he had already accepted. Still, he refused to admit that uncertainty had begun replacing certainty. Pride often whispers louder than evidence. Sergeant Nathan Briggs walked past the booking desk carrying a fresh stack of reports before stopping beside Cole. "Anything yet?" he asked. Cole shook his head. "Nothing useful. Every federal search keeps hitting security restrictions." Briggs answered without much concern. "Then somebody higher up can sort it out tomorrow." Marcus Ellison heard every word through the partially open hallway. He remained seated, his hands resting loosely together, his expression calm enough to unsettle anyone who expected fear. Nearly 2 hours and 30 minutes had passed. He knew the timeline of his assignment almost as well as he knew his own heartbeat. His scheduled check-in had now been missed long enough to trigger internal verification procedures. Somewhere, people were no longer wondering where he was. They were already working backward through every stop he had made that afternoon. Outside the station, traffic rolled steadily along the 4-lane road, while late afternoon sunlight reflected across windshields like scattered pieces of gold. Emily Carter locked the front door of her hardware store 15 minutes early, something she had never done in more than 20 years of business. She crossed the street carrying a small paper bag filled with fresh sandwiches and coffee, explaining to the front desk clerk that she simply wanted to thank the officers for their service. The receptionist smiled politely and accepted the bag, placing it on the counter. Emily glanced down the hallway and noticed Marcus sitting quietly inside the holding room. Their eyes met again. Once more, he offered nothing but a calm nod, almost as though he were reassuring everyone else that patience still mattered. Emily left the building with an even stronger feeling that something was deeply wrong. Back inside the station, Officer Dylan Brooks opened another computer terminal, hoping a different system might reveal information the earlier searches had missed. Instead, a message appeared requesting immediate contact with a federal supervisory office before accessing additional records. Brooks frowned. "That is new," he whispered. Cole stepped beside him, read the message, and dismissed it with another wave of his hand. "Ignore it. We already have him here." Brooks did not respond. For the first time since the arrest, he no longer sounded convinced. The clock continued its patient rhythm. 2 hours and 40 minutes. Marcus slowly stood and stretched his shoulders before walking toward the small window in the cell door. His reflection stared back at him through the reinforced glass. His father had once told him that character is revealed most clearly when nobody believes your side of the story. Marcus quietly smiled at the memory. He had carried those words through every challenge of his career because they reminded him that dignity never depended on someone else's opinion. It depended on your own choices. Then, somewhere beyond the station walls, the faint sound of several engines approached together. Not racing, not announcing themselves with sirens, just moving with quiet purpose. One officer near the front entrance glanced through the glass doors before slowly lowering the paperwork in his hands. Another followed his gaze. Black sport utility vehicles turned into the station parking lot one after another with disciplined precision, their headlights catching the fading afternoon light. No one inside spoke. Even the radios seemed quieter. Officer Brooks looked toward the parking lot, then back at the wall clock. 2 hours and 59 minutes. Before we continue, if you enjoy inspiring stories about courage, second chances, and people who choose kindness when it matters most, subscribe to Narralight. Our stories remind us that one decision, one voice, or one act of compassion can change a life forever. Now, let's see what happened next. No one inside the station moved for several long seconds. The black sport utility vehicles came to a smooth stop outside the front entrance with remarkable precision, their engines falling silent almost together. There were no flashing emergency lights, no raised voices, and no dramatic display of authority. The quiet itself carried enough weight to change the atmosphere. Officer Dylan Brooks slowly lowered the incident folder in his hands while Officer Travis Cole walked toward the lobby windows, trying to understand why so many federal vehicles had arrived without advance notice. Sergeant Nathan Briggs adjusted his uniform and stepped into the hallway, his expression shifting from routine confidence to cautious concern. Through the reinforced glass doors, several men and women wearing dark business attire exited the vehicles with calm, deliberate movements. Each carried an identification case. None appeared rushed because people who knew exactly why they had arrived never needed to hurry. Inside the holding room, Marcus Ellison finally stood from the metal bench. He straightened the sleeves of his gray hoodie, brushed an invisible speck of dust from one shoulder, and quietly looked toward the hallway. Nearly 3 hours had passed. Everything was unfolding exactly as procedure required. He had learned years earlier that real authority rarely announced itself with noise. It revealed itself through discipline, preparation, and accountability. The front doors opened, allowing the warm Virginia afternoon air to drift into the lobby along with polished leather footsteps echoing across the tile floor. Leading the group was Supervisory Special Agent Rebecca Hayes, her calm expression revealing neither anger nor surprise. She approached the reception desk with measured confidence before presenting her credentials. The young clerk examined the identification, immediately straightened his posture, and politely asked how he could help. Rebecca answered in an even voice. "We are here regarding Special Agent Marcus Ellison. We have reason to believe he is being held inside this facility." Those words seemed to freeze the room more effectively than any command ever could. Officer Brooks slowly turned toward Cole, searching his face for reassurance that never came. Cole forced a brief laugh that sounded far less convincing than before. "There has to be some misunderstanding," he said. Rebecca met his eyes without raising her voice. "That is exactly what we intend to determine." Another federal investigator quietly placed a sealed folder on the reception counter. Beside it came a formal authorization letter, assignment verification documents, and official contact records confirming Marcus had been conducting a federally protected undercover operation in the area. Every page had already been reviewed before anyone arrived. Every signature had already been verified. There was no confusion left inside the folder. The only remaining questions existed inside the station itself. Marcus heard familiar voices in the hallway and closed his eyes for a brief moment, grateful not because someone had rescued him, but because the truth had finally reached the people responsible for protecting it. Rebecca glanced toward the holding area before calmly asking, "Has Agent Ellison been allowed to contact his supervisory office since being detained?" The silence that followed stretched across the lobby. No one answered immediately. Officer Brooks lowered his eyes toward the floor, while Sergeant Briggs slowly removed his reading glasses, suddenly realizing that several decisions made during the afternoon would soon require careful explanation. Even Emily Carter, watching quietly through the front window from across the street, noticed the entire mood inside the station shift. Earlier she had seen confidence. Now she saw uncertainty. Marcus remained exactly where he was, showing no anger, no satisfaction, and no desire to embarrass anyone. His father had once told him that dignity becomes most visible when victory arrives without pride. Standing quietly behind the holding room door, Marcus understood those words better than ever before as the final seconds of the third hour disappeared from the station clock. Rebecca Hayes accepted the thick evidence folder from one of the federal investigators without opening it immediately. She already knew what it contained because every document had been reviewed before the convoy ever left the federal field office. Instead, she looked around the station with calm professionalism, allowing the silence to settle naturally. Sometimes the absence of words revealed more than an argument ever could. Officer Travis Cole shifted his weight uneasily before clearing his throat. "We were following procedure based on the information available to us." Rebecca acknowledged the statement with a small nod. "That is exactly why we are here. We are going to establish every fact carefully." There was no accusation in her voice. There was only precision. She requested the booking records, the dispatch log, the radio traffic, the body camera recordings, the interview notes, and the computer access history. Each request was made politely. Each answer became slower than the one before it. Officer Dylan Brooks quietly retrieved several files and placed them on the counter. As he organized the paperwork, he noticed something that had seemed insignificant earlier in the afternoon. Every attempt to access Marcus Ellison's employment records had generated an automatic instruction directing local personnel to contact a federal supervisory office before taking further action. The message had not disappeared. It had simply been ignored. Brooks swallowed quietly as he looked towards Sergeant Nathan Briggs. The sergeant removed his glasses once again and carefully reread the same notification. This time nobody dismissed it as another government computer problem. Rebecca finally opened the federal folder. Inside rested Marcus Ellison's credentials, assignment authorization, operational timeline, supervisory approvals, and multiple restricted notices explaining why portions of his identity could not appear in ordinary databases. Every page fit together with quiet consistency. Nothing inside required dramatic explanation because the facts spoke clearly on their own. Rebecca closed the folder and looked toward the holding area. "Please bring Agent Ellison out." The request was answered immediately. The electronic lock released with a soft click that echoed through the hallway much louder than anyone expected. Marcus stepped into the corridor with the same composed expression he had carried since arriving at the station. His hoodie remained neatly arranged, and his steady posture reflected neither resentment nor triumph. Rebecca extended her hand. Marcus accepted it with quiet respect. "Good afternoon, Agent Ellison." "Good afternoon, ma'am," he replied. "I apologize for the unexpected complication." A faint smile crossed Rebecca's face. "You have nothing to apologize for." Those simple words carried through the station more powerfully than raised voices ever could. Emily Carter, still watching from outside the front window, saw Marcus emerge into the hallway surrounded by federal investigators who greeted him not as a suspect, but as a trusted colleague. Her hand slowly covered her mouth as the entire afternoon finally made sense. Inside, Officer Brooks lowered his eyes. He remembered Marcus asking for only one phone call. He remembered the calm reply about anger never improving the truth. He remembered every opportunity when a different choice could have changed the outcome. Marcus noticed Brooks standing silently beside the booking desk and offered him a small, understanding nod instead of criticism. That unexpected kindness only deepened the young officer's regret. Rebecca turned toward the station leadership once more. This matter will be reviewed according to established legal procedures. We are interested only in verified facts and individual decisions." Her words were careful and deliberate, making one point unmistakably clear. Responsibility belonged to the people who made specific choices, not to an entire department or profession. Through the front windows, the late afternoon sunlight filled the lobby with a warm golden glow, reflecting softly across polished tile floors and quiet faces. The tension that had dominated the building for nearly 3 hours had transformed into something entirely different. Not relief, not celebration. Simply the unmistakable weight of accountability beginning to settle exactly where the evidence said it belonged. The station no longer sounded the way it had only minutes earlier. The laughter had disappeared. Casual conversations had faded into whispers, and every footstep across the polished tile seemed unusually loud against the growing silence. Supervisory Special Agent Rebecca Hayes remained composed as another federal investigator connected an encrypted laptop to review the station records alongside the operational timeline. Nobody rushed the process because accuracy mattered more than speed. One by one, the details aligned with remarkable clarity. Timestamps matched dispatch records. Security camera footage confirmed Marcus Ellison's movements before the detention. Computer logs showed repeated warnings directing officers to contact a federal supervisory office before proceeding. Every overlooked notification now became another piece of a picture that could no longer be ignored. Officer Dylan Brooks watched the review unfold with a sinking feeling. He remembered seeing those federal alerts appear on his monitor. He remembered assuming someone else had already verified them. Quietly, he realized that assumptions often become the first step toward mistakes. Sergeant Nathan Briggs stood beside the booking counter with his hands folded in front of him, saying very little. Years of experience had taught him that leadership meant accepting difficult conversations, and he knew one was now unavoidable. Rebecca finally looked up from the documents. The evidence indicates that multiple procedural safeguards were available throughout this incident. Several opportunities existed to pause, verify the information, and request federal confirmation before continuing. Her words remained calm, but every sentence carried undeniable weight. She was not interested in assigning blame through emotion. She was interested in understanding individual decisions through documented facts. Marcus listened quietly from across the room. His expression never changed. He did not interrupt. He did not seek recognition. Instead, he walked toward the booking desk where Officer Brooks still stood staring at the paperwork. "You asked me earlier why I stayed so calm," Marcus said gently. Brooks nodded without looking up. "Yes, sir." Marcus rested one hand lightly on the counter. "Because anger can cloud judgment, but patience allows the truth to arrive on its own." Brooks finally met his eyes. "I should have asked more questions." Marcus answered with a small, understanding smile. "Questions protect everyone." Those 4 words settled over the room more deeply than any lecture could have. Emily Carter was invited inside after investigators confirmed she had voluntarily reported observations from earlier in the afternoon. She explained exactly what she had seen and nothing more. She spoke about Marcus returning a lost wallet months before, helping elderly customers without expecting praise, and treating everyone with quiet respect each time he visited her store. Rebecca thanked her for remaining factual instead of emotional. Character witnesses were valuable because they described consistent choices, not dramatic moments. As Emily prepared to leave, she looked toward Marcus. "I never doubted the man I knew," she said softly. Marcus smiled with genuine gratitude. "Thank you for believing actions over appearances." Outside, the evening sky had begun turning shades of orange and deep blue as sunlight reflected across the windows of the station. Inside, the review reached its final stage. Internal oversight representatives documented the sequence of decisions exactly as they had occurred. No sweeping conclusions were made about law enforcement. No assumptions were made about anyone beyond the individuals whose documented actions were under review. Rebecca closed the final folder and addressed the room one last time. Accountability strengthens public trust because it reminds every professional that integrity is measured by choices, especially when no one believes anyone will notice. No one challenged her statement because every person present understood that the investigation had never been about power. It had always been about responsibility. Marcus glanced once more at the same wall clock that had quietly marked every passing minute of the afternoon. Earlier it had measured uncertainty. Now it measured something entirely different. It marked the moment when facts had spoken clearly enough that no assumption could stand against them any longer. The last rays of sunlight stretched across the station floor, painting long bands of gold over polished tile that only hours earlier had reflected uncertainty. Now they reflected something far more enduring. Responsibility. Supervisory Special Agent Rebecca Hayes remained near the booking desk, while internal oversight representatives carefully documented the final sequence of verified events. Every report focused on individual actions, individual decisions, and documented evidence. Nothing more, nothing less. That distinction mattered because justice depended on facts instead of assumptions. Officer Travis Cole stood quietly beside the conference table where the completed files rested in orderly stacks. The confidence that had once filled every sentence was gone, replaced by the unmistakable realization that shortcuts could never replace careful judgment. Sergeant Nathan Briggs reviewed the preliminary findings before placing his signature on the acknowledgement page. No arguments followed. No raised voices interrupted the room. Everyone understood that accountability had begun through established legal and administrative procedures, exactly as it should. Marcus Ellison watched the process with steady eyes, showing neither satisfaction nor resentment. Rebecca walked over and handed him a small evidence envelope containing the personal items collected during booking. His wallet, watch, identification, and notebook were returned exactly as they had been received. Marcus thanked the evidence technician with genuine courtesy before placing everything back into his pockets. The technician paused for a moment and quietly replied, "I am sorry for what happened today." Marcus smiled warmly. The best apology is making tomorrow better than today. Those words lingered throughout the room. Officer Dylan Brooks stepped forward, visibly carrying the weight of everything he had replayed in his mind during the investigation. "Agent Ellison," he said carefully, "I cannot change what happened, but I can learn from it." Marcus extended his hand without hesitation. Brooks accepted it, surprised by the absence of bitterness. "Good officers become better officers when they never stop asking questions," Marcus said. "Verification protects everyone, including the people wearing the badge." Brooks nodded slowly, understanding that lesson would remain with him far longer than any disciplinary memorandum ever could. Emily Carter was preparing to leave when Marcus caught up with her near the front entrance. She smiled with quiet relief. "I knew the man who visited my store every Tuesday was not the man described this afternoon." Marcus thanked her sincerely. "You trusted character more than appearances. That matters," she answered with a gentle laugh. "Kindness usually tells the truth before paperwork does." Outside, the evening air felt cooler as a light breeze carried the scent of freshly cut grass across the parking lot. The federal vehicles remained parked in neat formation while investigators concluded the final administrative steps. Rebecca joined Marcus on the front sidewalk for a brief conversation before their departure. "The operational delays created additional work for everyone," she said. "But your professionalism prevented a difficult situation from becoming much worse." Marcus looked toward the American flag moving peacefully above the station entrance. "My father always reminded me that integrity is strongest when nobody is applauding. I simply tried to honor that lesson." Rebecca smiled. "You did far more than that today." Behind them, the station continued operating as evening patrols prepared for their shifts. New calls arrived. New responsibilities waited. The building itself remained the same, but many of the people inside would carry this day with them for the rest of their careers. They had witnessed how quickly assumptions could mislead and how patiently truth could restore perspective. Marcus took one final look at the wall clock visible through the lobby window. Earlier it had measured waiting. Now it measured growth. Without another word, he walked beside Rebecca toward the waiting vehicle, leaving behind not anger, not revenge, but a quiet reminder that genuine strength is revealed through integrity, and that the most lasting victories are the ones that allow justice to speak louder than pride. If this story meant something to you, subscribe to Narralight for more powerful stories that remind us to look beyond appearances, challenge prejudice, and never underestimate the impact of doing what is right. Because sometimes, the smallest act of courage creates the biggest change. Thank you for watching. Remember, the world changes one choice at a time. We will see you in the next story. The federal vehicles disappeared beyond the corner of the street just as the last light of day settled over Richmond, leaving behind a station that looked exactly as it had that morning, yet felt completely different inside. The brick walls had not changed. The polished floors still reflected the overhead lights. The radios continued carrying ordinary calls from neighborhoods across the city. Life moved forward, just as it always did. But for everyone who had witnessed the events of that afternoon, ordinary would never feel quite the same again. Marcus Ellison sat quietly in the passenger seat beside Supervisory Special Agent Rebecca Hayes as they drove away from the station. Neither spoke for several miles. The silence between them was comfortable, built on mutual respect rather than unfinished conversation. Finally, Rebecca glanced toward Marcus with a faint smile. You could have demanded immediate explanations the moment we arrived. Marcus looked through the window as rows of oak trees passed beneath the soft evening sky. People learn more from accountability than humiliation, he answered. Rebecca nodded thoughtfully. She had supervised hundreds of investigations during her career, but moments like this reminded her why character mattered more than credentials. The following week, the official reviews concluded according to established legal and administrative procedures. The findings focused only on documented individual decisions and verified evidence. Appropriate personnel actions were taken regarding those whose conduct failed to meet professional standards. The process remained fair, transparent, and centered entirely on personal responsibility rather than broad conclusions about any profession or institution. Marcus never celebrated the outcome. When several colleagues congratulated him for remaining composed under pressure, he simply answered, "Justice is never about winning. It is about making sure the truth has room to be heard." Those words quietly spread throughout the field office, eventually appearing on a training presentation for newly assigned investigators discussing patience, professionalism, and procedural integrity. Weeks later, Marcus returned to Emily Carter's hardware store on a quiet Tuesday morning just before 8 o'clock, exactly as he had so many times before. The small bell above the front door chimed softly as he stepped inside. Emily looked up from arranging a display of work gloves and smiled immediately. "I had a feeling you would be back." Marcus laughed gently. "You still make the best coffee in the neighborhood." She handed him a fresh cup before either of them mentioned the events that had brought so much attention to her little store. Finally, Emily looked at him with quiet curiosity. "Do you ever think about what happened?" Marcus considered the question for a moment before answering. "Not because I want to remember the mistake," he said. "Because I want to remember the lesson." Emily nodded. "Which lesson?" Marcus looked toward the front window where the morning sun reflected across the sidewalk and ordinary people hurried toward work, each carrying stories nobody else could see. Every person deserves to be seen for their actions, not for assumptions. When we stop asking careful questions, we stop seeing people clearly. Emily smiled, knowing those words were worth carrying long after the headlines faded. Marcus thanked her for the coffee, wished her a good morning, and walked back outside. The cool breeze lifted the edge of his jacket as he crossed the parking lot toward his vehicle. Before opening the driver's door, he paused for just a moment and looked across the quiet street. The world had not become perfect. There would always be difficult choices, misunderstandings, and moments that tested people's integrity. But Marcus believed something even stronger. Every new day offered another opportunity to choose patience over pride, facts over assumptions, and dignity over anger. He started the engine and drove away without looking back. The morning sunlight slowly filled the empty parking space he had left behind, while somewhere in the distance, an American flag moved gently in the wind, and the quiet carried the final reminder that true strength is never measured by the power to overpower someone else, but by the courage to remain honorable when every reason to become bitter seems to stand in your way.